So Aaron's going to speak with us about Minnesota's state conservation agency that's developed and piloted an environmental benefits index for targeting conservation solutions to address landscape needs. The new tool helps local stormwater conservation district staff prioritizing tracts of land to be targeted for conservation easements or other practices. We're looking forward to Aaron's presentation. Take it away, Aaron.
Thanks, Ray. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the ecological ranking of parcels project that we conducted back in 2008 and 2009. The word tool is a bit of a misnomer because it's actually just it's a set of data layers that are available to our local conservation partners, more so than like an online web tool. So I got quite a few slides to go through, so I'm going to be going through them a little bit quickly. So bear with me. This was a project that was a cooperation between our agency, which is the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, and the University of Minnesota, funded through state dollars. So the goal of the project was basically to more effectively target conservation programs on the landscape. Marginally productive croplands, surface water protection areas, important habitat areas. The original focus was geared towards the massive amount of expiring conservation reserve program lands in the state. Then the idea was sort of expanded into other easement programs, our state easement programs, and other conservation efforts. So what do these data do? They basically include soils and landscape analysis, soils erosion potential, runoff potential, and surface water quality and wildlife factors. And then all those layers are combined into a single layer to try to address multiple conservation benefits simultaneously. So back to that biggest bang for your buck sort of theory. What do the data not do? They definitely don't replace site-specific procedures. So we all know that local units of government, have local site-specific procedures that are more precise and more accurately pinpoint areas on the landscape that need attention. This is more of a statewide effort to try to address things on a statewide level. So things like local soil loss equations, water quality assessments, those things still trump these data layers. It does not replace local knowledge. It also doesn't directly address forest resources or wetland restoration. So I'm going to jump right in and start talking about some of the data layers that were used for the ranking. We'll start with the potential soil erosion layer. Then there was a second factor, terrain analysis, surface water proximity, and then a third factor, habitat quality. And basically each one of these were translated into a risk factor. So the potential soil erosion translates into a soil sustainability risk. And then the combination of the terrain analysis and surface water proximity translates into a general water quality risk score. And then the habitat is the habitat quality score. And then all of those, again, combined into an environmental benefit, what we're calling an environmental benefits index. What's important to remember, and something we tried to drive home with our local partners, is that it's always a good idea to include ancillary data in conjunction with these data. It's only going to make them more accurate. There are a lot of local data sets that are available to local staff that could really impact these data layers and make them more accurate and more usable. So we'll start with the first one and get in a little more in depth, the soils layer, the potential water erosion. This was done using NRCS Surgo soils data. And this important thing to remember here is because this was a statewide effort, these calculations are basically based on bare soil conditions. So it's calculated from the RK and LS factors of the USLE equation, but not the management factors. So these numbers are not to be taken as absolute values of soil loss, but rather a comparative analysis of the landscape. So the higher potential erosion, greater conservation need. We also did calculate potential wind erosion across the state, although we didn't add it into the final EBI layer. But it would be this is a good example of supplementing ancillary data in those portions of the landscape where wind erosion is important. In Minnesota, We have the prairie pothole region and the northwest region, which is very flat and very susceptible to wind erosion, but then we have other portions of the state that are heavily forested, or the lake country that isn't as susceptible to wind erosion, so in those cases this data layer wouldn't be used. And the third layer is the water quality layer, and it basically combines proximity to surface water and terrain attributes. And what it's doing is it's identifying areas on the landscape that have potential for delivery of sediments and nutrients into surface waters. So the proximity is just simply the distance between a given parcel or a given area on the landscape and the nearest lake, river, or perennial or intermittent stream. This was done using local DNR data. The terrain analysis piece, I'm sure many of you are familiar with terrain analysis, but for those of you that aren't, it's basically used to, using digital elevation model data or DEM data to calculate terrain attributes across the landscape: slope, flow accumulation, which is basically the directly contributing area to any given point on the landscape, things like this. And it's particularly useful in calculating secondary terrain attributes such as the stream power index, which I'll get into a little more here, which identify these points of sediment delivery from riparian areas, gullies, side inlets, and the like. So for this project, we did use 30-meter digital elevation model data, simply because this was a statewide effort, and at the time we did not have statewide LIDAR data. We do currently have LIDAR data available statewide, and there's current research being conducted to assess the ability of LIDAR to be used in this type of fashion. So higher resolution data can be used where it's available, but for the statewide effort we went with 30 meters. Another reason for that is just because the sheer processing it would take to calculate this using LIDAR data statewide would be massive. So what is the stream power index? It's basically the flow accumulation times the slope of a given area. It's the natural log of the flow accumulation times the slope. So basically areas with higher slope and higher contributing area, higher flow accumulation, have a higher potential for overland erosion, and so therefore have a higher conservation need. So once we've calculated that across the landscape, we can pull out those areas that have high SPI values and representing likely overland flow paths, and then we can analyze different parcels. In this instance, these are CRP parcels, and those parcels containing a higher proportion of SPI critical areas have a higher overland erosion risk score within the EBI. So since this is calculated across the landscape, we can get this sort of value using any sort of parcel data or any delineated area. The habitat quality piece was a study done by the University of Minnesota up in Duluth in Minnesota, and it combines several different data layers into one. There's sites of biodiversity significance. There are several DNR models that were crunched together into this data set. There are also some USGS bird habitat models. That's for the prairie pothole region of the state only. And this data layer was used within a statewide conservation plan a couple years before this project was undertaken. So again, combining all three of those layers into what we're calling an environmental benefits index, and then including ancillary data where it's available to come up with a final priority ranking. So this idea of the environmental benefits index isn't a new one. This was basically used by the NRCS or the USDA for CRP, the CRP program. They used a few more weighting factors than we did in our data sets. We pulled out basically the three weighting factors that we were calculating for this program. And so basically the point here is that we have a weighting system that that was used for CRP that we used for this, but any weighting system really can be used in combining these data layers. If habitat quality is more important for your specific conservation need, you can weight that data layer more heavily. Likewise with the water quality or the soils risk. So a high EBI means a high risk for water erosion, high quality habitat, and high value for conservation. So it's calculated statewide on a soil survey polygon basis, which has a minimum mapping unit of 2 to 5 acres. And so basically there's 300 potential points for any given pixel on the landscape. Soil sustainability provides 100 points out of the potential 300. Water quality provides a potential 100, and wildlife provides a potential 100 points. So soil sustainability, again, up to 100 points in any given place in the landscape using the potential water erosion rates as an index. So that provides up to 100%. Environmental benefits index the water quality benefits is another 100 points, and that's the combination of proximity to streams and the SPI calculations. So the proximity to streams contributes up to 50 points, and the SPI values contribute up to 50 points for that factor. And again, the wildlife habitat contributes another 100 points, crunching those data layers together. So here's a visual look at some of the data. The missing pieces you're seeing in our state are counties that at the time did not have soil surveys conducted. So we were unable to calculate the EBI for those areas. Since then, a couple other counties have come back online, with Surgo data, and we're considering filling in those gaps when we have some time to do that. So you can see again the soils layer on top, plus the water quality, plus the habitat quality equals these EBI values that have a potential for 300 points, but the highest value in the state ended up being 288 and the lowest 24. Here's an example of what it looks like on a cropped landscape. So this is our prairie pothole region of Minnesota, very flat, lots of drained pothole regions, drained wetlands. And you can see the darker areas have the higher EBI score, so they would be considered higher conservation value. Here's an example in the bluffs, and so down in the southeast corner of the state, we have a lot of bluff land with the less wind-deposited soils there, and the rivers that have dug out deep valleys in that area of the landscape. So you can see it plays out a little differently here, and obviously the slope and the potential soil erosion are going to be contributing a lot to the score in this particular area, which you can see around the different stream tributaries. The higher scores really end up being along those steep slopes. And here's an area in the Central Lakes portion of Minnesota, which is sort of a transition zone between our forested area and our prairie pothole region. And here we've just picked out areas of the landscape that are being cropped. We're not including areas that are already have natural cover, because the areas that are being cropped are going to be the areas that we're going to be targeting for conservation practices or easements. And again, the darker areas have the higher score. So I'm going to go into a little more detail in this landscape. If we look at each one of these things separately, you can kind of see what's contributing to that final score. If you look at the soils risk, up in the upper left-hand corner, the number 1 circle has relatively higher values for soil risk. There's probably steeper slopes there, more erodible soils feeding into this lake that's in the center here. And then if you look at the second area, that's an upland area, and it, with very little slope and less soil risk involved. Water quality layer, again, in the number 1 circle, you're going to see higher values there because of the proximity to the streams feeding into the lake, and the SPI values are going to be higher there. And then this upland area, again, lower values, less important for conservation benefit. And here's the habitat quality for those same areas. You see a slightly higher score in that contributing area to the lake, and a slightly lower score in that number 2 region. So then we combine all those things together, and you can see the lighter area in that upland area and the darker areas pulling out in the cropped landscapes that are feeding into that lake in the northwest portion of the map. So this is an example of how this data can be applied to specific parcels. So we could take CRP lands if we're concerned with trying to protect all these expiring CRP lands and get them under some other sort of conservation program. We can score each CRP parcel using these data. And a little background here, there actually was an economic analysis done by the University of Minnesota Applied Economics Department that tried to predict the likelihood of CRP parcels exiting the program based on commodity prices and farming costs and things like that. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about that because it's going to take too long for the time we have here. But here's an example of a CRP parcel. So for each parcel, we can calculate the average soil degradation risk, water quality risk, habitat risk, and ultimate EBI score for any given parcel. So then if we look at this map, these are expiring CRP parcels that were considered the most likely to exit the program based on that economic analysis that I mentioned. So we can pull out that subset of the data, and then we can score them with our EBI values to figure out which parcels we can tell our local conservation partners that they might want to focus on trying to get into a state conservation easement program or some other sort of conservation practice. So the key points here, the methodology was designed to target conservation programs to expiring CRP, but then it was expanded to other types of critical lands. We've always tried to address marginal lands with our local partners and try to get those areas out of production and protected, riparian areas and the like. It definitely does not replace local knowledge or site-specific analysis. And these data layers should be combined with ancillary local data where available, particularly high elevation LiDAR data makes the data much more useful. Before I open it up to questions, I'm just going to show you our website. We have a page on our website. The URL is up here, bowser.state.mn.us, and if you go to the ecological ranking page, which is under resource and management and planning, you'll see a page dedicated to these data sets. There's descriptions on here of the various data layers. There are overview presentations you can download. And then we did provide a series of technical trainings to local governments on how to actually utilize these data within GIS. And we got a little more in depth into how they can combine their ancillary data sets with these, how you can weight the different data layers differently to come up with different results. If you're interested in that level of detail, you can download the lecture materials that we used for those training sessions. You can download the workbook stuff that we did and the data layers that we used for training. And to download the actual data for Minnesota, if anybody's interested in just looking at it within their own GIS context, you can download those data layers over here on the right-hand side. The University of Minnesota, I'm sorry?
Outstanding, Aaron. This is Ray.
I think that pretty much covers it. There is just one quick thing. There is an interactive map available too if anyone wants to check that out. You can view the different layers separately or together, and you can change the opacity of each of the layers to sort of on the fly weight them. But
Very good.
We probably don't have time to get into that right now.
Thanks so much, Aaron, and we will press on here. And just to remind everyone, the questions, enter on your question dashboard as opposed to Aaron or Kim or any of our speakers. I want to make sure that we've left plenty of time, though, for Michelle. So, Aaron, thanks so much. Any last-minute note while I change the presenter?
No, thank you very much.
Very good.